Hey guys, welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're new. Today's video is the second video in a series that I've started on this channel called the Finish a Journal series. If you haven't seen the first video in this series, where I kind of intro the project idea, I will link that down in the description of this video as well as in the cards. But if you don't really want to watch that video, a brief overview of this project is that I have a lot of unfinished art journals lying around my studio. I like to work in multiple different journals at the same time, and this leads to various journals at various stages of completion. And I rarely actually go through the pages of these journals and get them to a point where I'm happy calling them finished. They're always kind of works in progresses. And so in this series, I'm specifically working on this journal. Since I had managed to get it to a point where almost all of the pages were close to being done, and so I thought that I would go through and actually finish them. Now, to sort of ease myself into the process of working in this journal, I started by trying to work on one of the pages that has been giving me a little bit of a difficult time. I also worked on this page in my last video, and I still haven't managed to call it finished. But in this video, I simply tried to sketch in some hairlines for this little portrait to kind of give myself some sort of base for defining the features more in the future. There's just something about this page that really doesn't want to work with me. So I think this is going to be one of those things that I'm going to have to make a very conscious effort to actually complete. This is one of those pages that in a lot of my journals would probably never be finished. I would always just kind of brush it off and let it exist as it is. But that is the point of this little video series. It is to continue pushing me as an artist and to actually hold me accountable to finishing things. Another thing you will see me do in this video before I move on to kind of the final page is that I moved to a single page where I had the rough shape of a head/body kind of blocked in acrylic paint, and I just sketched a face on top in colored pencil. I did this fairly roughly and without giving it too much thought, and I will most likely be going back to this figure in a future video in this series, where I will actually probably use some ink to emphasize those lines even more, and actually finish this figure. Then with those two out of the way, I finally moved on to the page that I pretty much work on for the rest of the video. I had previously put down a couple of face shapes and sketched on top of that with a blue ballpoint pen. So I had kind of a jumping off point moving into this video. And for some reason, this was just the spread that was calling to me. When I work in my art journals, I like to work rather intuitively, and if I am flipping through my book and something tells me that that's what I need to work on, I can work on that thing for extended periods of time with no problems. And that is kind of what happened in this video. Now, the first step I took towards making progress on this spread was to just start adding some shadows in a darker acrylic paint. I used a pretty small brush and I just blocked in those basic shadow shapes. When it comes to my art journals, I'm not usually too perfectionistic about where I put my shadows. I generally have some kind of vague idea of where I want the light source to be coming from, but if it's not perfect, it doesn't really bother me. Once I had those shadow shapes down, it was time to move on to some colored pencil. As I mentioned in my last video where I drew a self-portrait, colored pencil, specifically Prismacolor colored pencils, and acrylic paint, specifically cheap acrylic craft paint, is kind of a personal favorite combination of supplies for me, especially when it comes to my art journals. There is just something about the texture of the colored pencil over top of the craft paint that is extremely enjoyable to me. So I started sketching in my lines for these figures over top of the blue ballpoint with a black cherry Prismacolor pencil. And I actually really like the way the two line styles sort of blended together in the finished result. I am definitely going to need to experiment more with ballpoint pens in my art journals in the future. In this particular example, the light blue ballpoint just kind of bled through to the finished result. It just added a little bit of extra depth that I really like the look of. Now, as I was tracing these pre-sketched lines, I also blocked in a few extra details, such as where I wanted the hair to be, as well as some vague shirt shapes. I tried to kind of vary both the hairstyles and the clothing styles just slightly to add a little bit of interest to the spread. Sometimes if I have multiple figures on the same page and their hair is too similar, it just is noticeable as being very samey. That's obviously fine if it's a stylistic choice and you're trying to create figures that resemble each other in some way. But in this particular instance, I did want there to be some contrast. Now, after the hair had been sketched in with colored pencil, it was time to add color to it. And I chose to do this again with acrylic paint. For the girl on the right, I chose a very dark navy blue and a very light purple for the girl on the left. For the girl on the left, I also painted her shirt with the leftover acrylic that I had, and that just gave that light purple figure a kind of more cohesive look overall. After the acrylic was dry, I moved back to the same colored pencil, and I redefined those hairlines that I had kind of painted over when I added color, and I also added a handful of colored pencil lines to act as little strands of hair. Next up, I added some teal acrylic paint to the background of the page. The right page in particular felt a little bit chaotic. I had done quite a bit of collage work in the background, and it was just sort of overwhelming the page, in my opinion. So adding the teal acrylic over the top just kind of blended everything together pretty nicely. Once that was done, I added a quote. I decided to go with the words, "You are the greatest project you will ever work on." I tend to choose quotes or words that are reflective of what I need to hear at the moment that I'm making the page. Sometimes they can come across as a little bit dramatic, but as they are something that I do for my own mental well-being, I'm totally okay with that. And in order to add this quote to my page, I wrote it in cursive, and then I went back in and thickened some of the lines in order to give it a little bit of a more stylized look. And once that was done, I then outlined the entire quote in white gel pen. The white gel pen around the outside just helps the words stick out even more from the page and be more of a focal point. I added a little bit more teal acrylic to the background in the upper right hand side, and then I was pretty much ready to call it done. In the end, I'm really happy with the way that this spread turned out. It was extremely enjoyable and almost therapeutic to work on. Sometimes I struggle with art journal pages, as I mentioned near the beginning of this video, and sometimes they just come to me very naturally and easily, and that was the case with this last one. So I really hope that you enjoyed seeing this art journal process video. Thank you all so much for watching. You can subscribe to see more videos like this or very different from this in the future. And until next time, happy creating!